They write it this way. They say there's an, quote, increasing influence of real estate investors buying up houses, especially at the lower end of the market, turning them into rental properties. Now, again, the accusation, as you put it, Matt, the conspiracy, if conspiracy there is the idea that because of the nature of homes being purchased, the people who would ordinarily purchase these homes, the actual human beings, are left with no recourse other than to continue paying a landlord. History is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. All right, what's the gist? Guys, we all know this. Paul, you know this. You've heard the story. What's the story people are talking about when critics say folks buying up homes actually aren't folks at all?
It's the concept that it isn't just a set of folks, maybe one, maybe about four, or as we said, 4.5. It's companies. It's holding companies, hedge funds, Wall Street investors, even pension funds that are supposedly buying up a ton of the single family houses that are on the market and doing other stuff with them. Not just buying it up and like flipping it the way you would if you were, these really popular reality TV shows where it's a couple or something and they buy a house and they make it look real fancy like, and then they sell it back for a bunch more money and they make a profit and then they just keep doing it. No, these places are supposedly just buying up houses, maybe even entire neighborhoods or every house that becomes available in a certain area. And then instead of selling them, turning them into rental properties that are the actual price of rent is way more expensive than it was before that those big companies came through and bought all the houses.
I'd be interested in seeing a plot over time of rent prices, in the Atlanta area. I know even since I've been living here, they have there's an allowable amount. It's not like we exactly have rent control, which is a concept in New York, for example, where if you've been living in a place for a certain amount of time, they can only raise the rent so much or whatever. Mm-hmm. And there's something along those lines here. But I know that whenever I rented from a person for a long time, and he was always very, very reasonable with what he would raise the rent every year. But then I recently rented from one of these companies that we're talking about, a company called Excalibur Homes. And they raised it the maximum they possibly could every time the renewal came up. And it was very clearly that it's a home that was probably in what would be considered a transitional neighborhood or an area where maybe the land is even worth more than the house, and minimal cosmetic stuff to flip it to the next tenant, paint jobs that would just flake off, over time, and, very kind of shoddy workmanship. Anytime I wanted to get something done, they'd bring in, the lowest bidder who would come in and do the job with stuff from Home Depot, and only certain things. You had to submit everything through a portal on the internet, and very clear that they're going to rent this thing until it falls into the ground, and then they're going to bulldoze it and sell it to some other developer that wants to actually build something on it.
Well, now that is one case, right? That is one example of something that has happened. But what we've seen is that there's an accusation that this is just the new normal. This is the what is happening across the board, right? And in addition to just that practice of buying up the homes, turning them into rental properties, the accusation is that this process is to blame for an actual family, actual humans being unable to find a house on the market to purchase.
Of course.
Dooming them to the rent trap. Yeah. And, I don't share too much of my private life here on the air, but folks, there's some firsthand knowledge here. Updates later, maybe, but that's the question. And you pose it so well, Matt. Is there any truth to these claims? Well, experts, self-appointed or otherwise, don't seem in agreement. This story first caught the general public spotlight back in 2021. So last year, as we record this, thanks in large part to an article run in the Wall Street Journal, which announced the story of an investment firm that won a bidding war to purchase not a house, but an entire neighborhood of single family homes in a place called Conroe, Texas. Almost immediately, there was this huge backlash, and there's an argument that continues today. To sum it up, I think we should look at a great New York Times article by Sophie Kasakov in April of 2022. And they write it this way. They say there's an, quote, increasing influence of real estate investors buying up houses, especially at the lower end of the market, turning them into rental properties. Now, again, the accusation, as you put it, Matt, the conspiracy, if conspiracy there is the idea that because of the nature of homes being purchased, the people who would ordinarily purchase these homes, the actual human beings, are left with no recourse other than to continue paying a landlord, corporate or otherwise, just helping that person pay their own mortgage or property taxes with a little bit of a vig on the side. And that's the thing. There is a definite strategy. To call this uncoordinated or non-strategic is misleading. And if anybody says that, they're lying to themselves or to you. Another pull from the New York Times article, which I thoroughly enjoyed, is this about the targeting. More than 93% of homes purchased by corporations as of May of 2021 were bought for under $300,000, and many of them were in predominantly black neighborhoods or predominantly low-income neighborhoods. But this is like, okay, so you hear this, and this sounds alarmist, right? Or this sounds very, very dangerous. We as readers love a simple story. Give me a bad guy, right? Give me a face. That's why celebrity news gets so much more attention than actual issues that matter to the world. But if you look at the numbers, you see something interesting. I didn't know this, and I actually thought this number still feels a little low to me. But right now, the United States has around 140 million housing units, and it sounds low until you realize that is such an umbrella term. It means everything from mansions and opulent palaces to micro apartments, where there's like a shoebox with a bed that is a Murphy bed and the toilet's underneath that. And you pay $5,000 because you're in San Francisco or whatever. So it includes every place where people live, about 140 million of those. And The Atlantic has an excellent article that I don't agree with, to be honest. I think it's very well written. And I looked into the statistics they pull, and those check out. I checked their sources.
Is that the one when Wall Street is your landlord?
No.
Okay,
this is the one in opposition to that.
Okay.
Did check out both of those. And we'll reference that one as well, because I think that's important too. That's a banger. But this article in The Atlantic says it's kind of in defense of BlackRock, and you'll see why we're bringing up BlackRock. BlackRock owns stake in a company called Invitation Homes. And it's very confusing. They're playing the Academy XE game. So, all right. Of those 140 million household units, about 80 million are standalone single family homes. Your 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom place. And of those 80 million, about 15 million are for rent. And we're just narrowing the scope, right? We're zooming in from a wide view. So of those 15 million single family rentals, what we could call banks or shadow banks or institutional investors only own about 300,000 right now, as of now. And most of the rest of that, those 15 million, are currently owned by what you would call individual landlords. So zoom in a little closer. Of those 300,000 homes as of June 2021, Invitation Homes, this company, owned 80,000. That number is growing today.
Yeah.
Now we got
and that's a year where the houses grew in worth by 20%, right? So like the
Yes.
activities of these companies with injections, you have to imagine those numbers, that 300,000 number has likely grown quite a bit over that year of record. Oh my God, there's more profit in these houses. Let's go.
Right. And if you're familiar with these allegations of conspiracy, you've probably heard those allegations referring to that company we just mentioned, BlackRock. What is BlackRock? All right, BlackRock is based in New York. It comes about in the 80s. It is currently the world's largest asset manager. They are in charge of making money make more money. So right now, as of January 2022, BlackRock manages around $10 trillion worth of assets. This is also part of the reason, by the way, it's been called the world's largest shadow bank. And not just by, not just by folks like you and me and folks like people listening today, but by outfits like The Economist, which you don't think of really as some sort of fringe anti-capitalistic periodical. Anyway, there's another thing here that's really interesting, just to straighten this out for everybody. You've probably read a lot of reports that talk about BlackRock as being the actual Invitation Homes. BlackRock isn't really. BlackRock invested in Invitation Homes, but Invitation Homes has spun out from another company, Blackstone. So there are two different companies.
No.
One is BlackRock, one is
no.
Blackstone. Yeah. I'm telling you.
These are like subsidiaries of one another?
They're unrelated.
That's
I mean,
absurd.
BlackRock has invested in Invitation Homes, which was spun off from Blackstone. I hope there's, at the top, I can't be alone thinking this. I've just always sort of fancied the idea that there really is a cabal, but it's not a secret society. They don't have fun rituals or, goat themed pentagrams and pentacles and stuff. They're just like a group of, 12 to 20 people who eventually over time realize that they're all on this interlocking Venn diagram of boards and corporations. And then they had a meeting,
Yeah.
Totally.
It's just
that's the secret behind all secret societies, I think, for the most part, is it's just they happen organically once you reach a certain echelon of success in business. And then you figure out how to, of course, completely above board, benefit one another with your activities and your choices and your donations and all of that stuff.
just hedge fund primary stakeholders. They're like, yep,
Yes.
that's me. Hey, guys, what's going on today at the golf course?
HFPS. So if you look at this, jokes about cabals and uncreative name choices aside, it looks like by the numbers, these institutions that have been demonized clearly in media, they actually are buying up a relatively small piece of the pie for now. Because while that number might seem small in comparison, it's huge in areas targeted by these companies. Again, there is a strategy at play here. You can call it a conspiracy. You can call it a market plan. You can call it just good old-fashioned investment, right? But we need to understand how it works. And to understand how it works, really, I don't know how far we want to go back in today's episode, but for the sake of time, let's... Yeah, right. Okay. So 07 and then the housing crash, right? And then this leads to the foreclosure epidemic, you could call it, in 2010. Uncle Sam, aka the feds, panic. And they realize hundreds of thousands of families who otherwise were doing fine before this happened, they are going to lose their homes. They went from doing fine and being able to pay their bills on time and, still chase that American dream to getting physically kicked out of their houses, which for many of these families were the only equity they had. And so the feds start saying, look, entire neighborhoods are getting boarded up, right? This is bigger than one house or one sob story. We might need to intervene. The housing market continues to crash. And they say, if this continues, prices are going to keep dropping for people or institutions that already own property, right? Homeowners during this time, and they're saying, the value of my home is tanking. I'm worried. And the feds are worried because if they don't keep these people happy and spending money and investing and keeping the positive feedback loop going, then it could endanger the economic recovery they're banking on. Poor choice of words. But there weren't a lot of people who were ready to buy homes. The past few years have been hard. You know what I mean? And you can even look back now and say, yeah, that was a rough time. Mortgages were also pretty difficult to get.
So we have to address something because of everything you're saying here, Ben. The way you gather wealth, a lot of people know this. You probably know this, but we have to state it. The way you generate wealth over time by owning a home, even if you owe a bank just a ton of money and you don't, you own it on paper, but you're paying monthly into a mortgage, which is just a loan from a bank. The way you generate money is by having a stake in that home, more and more money invested into that home, that when it's time for you to turn around and sell it or borrow more money based on how much equity you have in that house, you can get more things. You can grow yourself, right? And at this point in the past, when that crash happened, those companies were worried about how much their property is worth, but each individual family has to worry about how much their property is worth, because it may mean, well, there's no way we can sell this property for a profit now. We'll just have to pay the bank the rest of this mortgage because we're not going to have the money even if we sell the house. It's just a terrible situation.
With an individual family, it's like you got all your eggs in that one basket. With a giant corporation, you're diversified. You've got of course, a giant housing crash across the board is not good for them either. But at the very least, it's not like they're on the street, And to your point about generating wealth by owning houses, that's one way people can get into the landlord game. You buy one house. Once you have that note that you're carrying, it gives you a lot more borrowing power. To buy another house, and then you parlay that into some sort of rental property and create passive income, and then you flip that one into, or not flip it like sell it, but you parlay that into a third one. I've got a friend who owns like 6 or 7 rental houses here in Atlanta, and he's what you'd call a benevolent landlord. Like, he does this to compete to a degree with these companies that we're talking about that just absolutely gouge rental prices and cause problems across the board for anyone that's trying to buy a house.
Yeah. And you've mentioned this person before, and this is, they're not the only one out there. We're not saying all landlords are bad. Most people, of course, the vast majority think of themselves as quote unquote the good guys, and they're trying to do things that they think are decent, right? Most people are not villains and don't see themselves as such. And neither did the federal government in 2012 when it did intervene and launched a pilot program meant to allow private investors a way to easily buy homes that have been foreclosed. They were buying them, and they could buy them in bulk, by the way, from Fannie Mae. So they're buying them straight from the government via Fannie Mae. And then these new owners, here, the idea was always that these new owners would rent out these homes and they would create more housing in areas that had been absolutely trampled by foreclosures. So you can see how it feels like an emergency measure, and you can see how there's a greater good at play. And I love this line, shout out to Meg Burns, who was interviewed in this another Atlantic article, the one you mentioned earlier, Matt, by Alana Samuels. Meg Burns doesn't really try to put any sugar coating on the medicine here. She was former senior associate director of the Office of Housing and Regulatory Policy. And in an interview, she just said, we were trying to influence demand. She's just being plain about it. We were trying to put our thumbs on the scale. We needed to make these things more attractive, and we went to investors. And for a while, the plan seemed successful. Between just 6 years, 2011 to 2017, some of the world's largest financial entities, the hedge funds, the private equity groups, you know what I mean? The suits, those cats, fat or otherwise, spent a combined $36 billion buying more than 200,000 homes. And
Jesus.
I know, right? It's good work if you can get it. And meanwhile, I know I say this too much, but I can't get away with a late fee at the library. Seriously? Miss Fairchild, you're going to sweat me on this? Whatever. She doesn't listen to the show.
She's a real stickler, Ben. You really,
I know. I respect. Order must exist.